Amen. Over the last two presentations, we placed ourselves in the time period of Jacob's time of trouble. We saw that in two lines from the end of ancient Israel. We're after the cross. We're also after the baptism, Christ's temptation in the wilderness. Then we began looking at Ellen White's dream. She had it in 1868, and we read through that whole dream, that whole passage, and we plotted it on a line as we read each point where there is a growth in intensity of this journey. There's only a portion that even begins this journey. Most of this large group don't even start the journey. A portion begins, but they begin it in relative ease and comfort. And then at each point along this journey, that way becomes more and more difficult. They have to leave their things behind, the things that made this journey comfortable, the luggage, the wagons, the horses. They don't even have to walk at the beginning of this journey. In that early period, God had to lead in a special way because they had not yet let go of their baggage. Once they're finally ready to go on foot, there are cords released from over this wall. No one knows what they're attached to, but no one's questioning it. They're just trusting in God. Those cords begin small. They grow along the path, as they journey along the path. They grow from small to about the circumference of a person's body. So you go from holding it onto it with your hands to holding it onto it with your entire body. Then they let go of their shoes, they let go of their stockings. At that point, she mentions how at every point people are lost along this pathway. And what can they hear coming up from beneath them? She describes music in 4 different ways. So I didn't intend to make a point about that, but I think that it is relevant. There is the anguish, there is the war zone, the war music, but there is also the music of dancing and revelry. There's also the laughter, the swearing, so you have more than one experience that they can hear coming up from the chasm. At each waymark, people are swept off the path and down into that chasm, and they're broken on the rocks. She specifically marks people being lost on that path, falling off the path at this point in time, which we've identified by the context of the line as being between 2012 and 2014, right when we began to have our intense internal shakings. There's a point in time where she says it became much more intense. The danger increased. We then suspended nearly our whole weight upon the cords. We marked that as 2014. This was the empowerment of the second angel and the third angel. That's when those lines become much more life and death. If you don't trust the lines in this history, when almost the whole weight is suspended upon them, you will fall off the path. And many people did in this history. A sister mentioned about FFA's July 18 prophecy. What went wrong with them? Somewhere between here and arriving at the beginning of the chasm, people were no longer willing to suspend almost their whole weight upon the cords. Future for America was not willing to do that. Why? Future for America was no longer to do that because what did those cords represent? Parable teaching methodology. and parable teaching methodology in this time period, what is it telling them? Equality, equality, equality. It's telling them that their entire social, conservative, evangelical, conspiratorial, nationalistic mindset was incorrect. That was too much weight for them to put on parable methodology. It was too great a test. So they were swept off the path into the wicked world below. They had to let go of parable teaching and lines. That's the only way that in the history, when you are meant to be in the wilderness, you would accept and pursue a message like July 18. That is in itself, does not use parable methodology, but also to think that there is such a message in that time period is also to reject parable methodology. And so, at each point, some are swept away. Then they come to the chasm. Now there is no ground beneath their feet. Now they must put their entire weight upon those cords to get them to the other side. All earthly support is cut off. We spoke about that earthly support. If I was to keep it to the lines outside of individual experience, there are two particular earthly supports in this time period. Two lines of Christ. Two lines that show an incorrect understanding of the nature of this kingdom. Both of those will not get you over this chasm. Both of those require a letting go of reform lines. Whether we believe in an activist, liberal movement, that cannot be defended upon the lines, that will sweep us over the cliff. If we believe in a socially conservative movement, if we believe in nationalism, in sexism, not just surface level, we have to go deep. If that is what we deep down hold on to and practice, we will not make it through this time period. On the personal level, if we are here holding on to those things because of family and friends and comfort and a desire for position and power, if those are the things that have kept us on this path all the way along, it will no longer do that work. And for many, this makes the pathway this time period, lack of pathway, one of agony. I don't want to suggest everyone who is struggling is somehow failing or somehow here for the wrong reasons. James and Ellen White, they're on that path, and what are they saying? What are these attached to? She knows she's questioning, he's questioning. Everyone is struggling, everyone is suffering. That is the experience of Jacob in his time of trouble. But we must come to the point where by faith we say, God holds the lines. That is why I said 2 weeks ago I asked everyone, go back to those lines and place yourself. Know where you are. That line will hold on to it. Don't hold it with your hands. Go back, place yourself on those lines, wrap your arms around them. Trust that they will keep you secure, that they will show you what is truth and what is error. In those same presentations, I spoke about organization. Now, I just want to show us one example of the danger that we are in. There was a conflict between those presentations 2 weeks ago and today. I won't name the brother, but there is a brother still considering himself as part of the movement, but in rejection to leadership. There's issues with sexism. There's a few different issues. He wrote to me upset about some discipline that had been taken against him. And what I did is I sent him the presentations of 2 weeks ago. I sent him the presentations from Sabbath 2 weeks ago done in Australia. And I said, in these presentations, through the reform lines, we talk about organisation. If you watch the presentations, you'll understand why the leadership has done what they have done. He replied to me the following: what you have said in these presentations is nothing new. It has been existing before. There's nothing new that you're going to bring out in these presentations. I will not watch them. So he hadn't watched them to know that. He knew that I am saying nothing new. I'm not teaching anything new. I'm going back to the reform lines that we have already had. He says, you have been repeating the same thing over and over again. This is a man who believes that he has a new message this movement must accept. I've heard parts of it. It's what we've already taught, so I don't understand his point. But he believes that he has a voice and a message this movement must listen to. And he will not watch any more of my presentations because he says that I'm just repeating the same thing. I'm bringing out nothing new. I'm only saying what has already existed. Therefore, he will not watch. So I know full well that he's not watching now. And yet still in the movement, leading out disciples, leading innocent people to follow him, to join his and others' private chat groups where he's sharing his version, his ideas of truth and error, of the nature of man, of the nature of God, of his understanding of equality. He will not watch my presentations because I'm repeating the same thing. If he'd watched those presentations from last Sabbath, he would have heard me say, come Canada, I'm going to repeat the same thing. And that's all I intend to do here. We are repeating the same reform lines, but they are growing in size. They have been growing in size from the time that they were given to us. So we are repeating the same lines. We're repeating the end of ancient Israel, the beginning of modern Israel. We will repeat Acts 27. We will repeat the revolutions. And if we bring out nothing new in this camp meeting, I hope people have the faith in God's leading to understand why we are repeating ourselves. These lines are what brings us over the chasm. We can't afford to say, if there's nothing new, I won't listen. We can't afford to say, if I don't get a new line, I'm not going to hold on to this one. There is a growth in these lines, but in this time period, we have had no new message. So what holds us? What we've already seen and experienced in these lines. So I want us to come back to Acts 27, and all I want us to do at least through the next few presentations, there are a couple of other things I want us to look at. I want us to place ourselves on the lines that we have been given, particularly over the last 2 years. We won't get through all of them, but there's some specific ones I want us to relook at. A sister asked, are there chat rooms in this movement that we need to avoid? Which ones? We will at some point make a statement about what chat rooms people have created who are not in the message. They may say they are, but they are not. If people are joining those chat rooms to hear studies from brothers who have already rejected equality in practice, who are teaching what is not endorsed by the movement, we do need to say so people know that they are not getting messages that this movement accepts. Another answer to this question, just avoid all chat rooms. I don't like chat rooms. I think people tend to think that somehow in online discussion and debate truth comes out, and it doesn't. It does more damage than good. But that's a separate rant for a separate day. People have freedom to join chat rooms if they like. So we're going to come back to Acts 27, and I just want us to briefly place ourselves on those lines, and then we're going to move on to another study. So I won't redraw the whole lines. I want to keep it larger so that we can see it on the boardwork. Acts 27 also gives us two reform lines. Two ships, Adramyttium and Alexandria. So I won't draw the whole line. I want to draw a particular dispensation, 9/11 to the Sunday law. What's the theme of these lines? Someone can give me the theme in the chat, in the question and answer box. Theme of the lines? Delana says time setting 25:20. This is Acts 27. It's going to take us from 9/11 to the Sunday law. So the theme of the whole lines. "9/11 for the ship of Adramyttium is the waymark of Sidon. After Sidon comes Cyprus. I'm going to agree with the answer, institutions. These are two institutions. Sister Charity, two institutions. What are those two institutions? And Brother Blessing. Because it's plural. USA and SDA. Agreed. So there's two institutions, the United States and Adventism, both raised up in 1798. Both are going to go through this experience from 1798 through to the Sunday law. At Sunday law, those institutions are destroyed, they come to their end. So in the ship of Adramyttium, it takes us from Sidon to Cyprus to Myra. "9/11, midnight cry, Sunday law." So in this line, there's only one waymark for midnight and midnight cry. Where do we have a precedent to do that? Where else do you only have one waymark for midnight and the midnight cry? There's another story, another Bible story that will take you from 9/11 to one waymark for the midnight cry to a shut door. What's that story? Matthew 25. The 10 virgins, where we get midnight and midnight cry from. So if you were to go to Matthew 25, verse 5, while the bridegroom tarried, they all slumbered and slept. So verse 5 is what waymark? The bridegroom tarries, they slumber and they sleep. The tarrying we mark at 9/11. What did Paul do at Sidon? He tarried. So we have Sidon lining up with 9/11, and there's the tarrying time. Verse 6, and at midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Then all those virgins arose and trimmed their lamps. And shortly after that we have the shut door. So there is the tarrying time on one side, the shut door at the other, and it speaks of midnight and midnight cry as being one waymark. So this is not something that does not have precedent. And what is their experience at this waymark, Cyprus? So that we know that from this time period, midnight cry, here combined into one, here begins the sea of Cilicia and Pamphylia. This is the overturning of a nation made up of every tribe. So what is being overturned here? A nation made up of every tribe is being overturned, and what do you have rising? Unilateralism, dictatorship. So as the United States, you can take this a couple of different ways. You can see the fall of the sixth kingdom, the rise of the seventh. You can also see the fall of globalism, the rise of nationalism. At the same time, it's the fall of Adventism and the rising up of this movement. So there's a couple of different applications you can make of that time period. We're not going to get into it for time. But that experience begins here. It occurs between Cyprus and Myra. At Cyprus, what do they encounter? This history of midnight cry. Two false prophets, Elymas and Simon Magus. So I'm also not going to get into these false prophets. I don't want to go into the details of every reform line. But just to remind us, what did we do last year? 2018 last year. We made application. I'm not sure if everyone understands that clearly. That when Acts 27 was taught over the last 18 months, we used an application in understanding Elymas and Simon Magus. From the very beginning of the sharing of Acts 27, post-October 2018, we were making the point that there is an internal counterfeit message to the midnight cry. we began explaining that, expressing that very early on. So we didn't look at this on the scale of the ship of Adramyttium, on the scale of institutions. We took that story and we made application. Elymas is Jewish, although he has two names. He has an Arabic name and a Jewish name, which I find interesting. But the internal, particularly, that we looked at, Simon Magus. He's a baptized member of the movement, and he has a counterfeit message right at the point where you expect the midnight cry message to be. And who did we make that? Simon Magus. If we were to name someone, I don't think in mind now, we named him Theodore, because we understood that right when there was a midnight cry message, right when we were using time setting correctly, there was another version of time setting, a counterfeit to time setting, a counterfeit to parable teaching, a counterfeit to the midnight cry. So when we took this line, we made application. If for the institutions there's an internal counterfeit at the midnight cry, then for this movement there's an internal counterfeit to the midnight cry. And we used that to identify, to prepare people for what was already developing inside the movement. So on the scale of Acts 27, that was an application. So we would need to look at that again to make an application on that scale of 9/11 to the Sunday law. Now we're talking about 2019 to 2021. Now we're talking about the time period we're currently in, not the midnight cry of 2018. Now the swelling cry that we are currently in must also have an explanation for an external and an internal threat. The ship of Alexandria. That's all I want to say on that point for now. The ship of Alexandria. I'm not going to draw that whole journey again from 1798. Again, we will do it from 9/11 to the Sunday law. So now, in the ship of Adramyttium, it divides the midnight from the midnight cry waymark. Remember, the theme is institutions. Question was asked, what was the external threat in 2018, 2019 in terms of the two false prophets? Does anyone else want to answer that? Does anyone else want to give their suggestions in the chat? What was happening externally through those waymarks? 14, 16, 18. So Brother Esteban says, Moore's Fahrenheit 11.9 versus the Trump prophecy. I would suggest, I would agree with that. So externally, you have two streams of information. Internally, you have two streams of information. So there is a true stream, a true prophet. At that point in time for the Nethinims, who's their true prophet? Michael Moore, Fahrenheit 11.9, saying this is the last president of this republic. He's going to end the republic. Linking him to November 9, the events that have occurred through history on November 9. Then you have a false prophet, the Trump prophecy, the idea that Trump is raised up of God as a modern day Cyrus. The problem is those inside the movement are impacted by both. It divides Nethinims, it divides externally, it divided these two institutions. I hope we can see that what's happening, not just then, but continues to happen, is dividing those institutions. And a house divided itself against itself cannot stand. So you have an external prophet and also an internal false prophet. The external false prophet is nationalistic and sexist and homophobic. The internal false prophet is nationalist and sexist and homophobic. One speaks more to the external, one speaks to the internal. Both streams, both sides use Bible prophecy to justify their position. The true sides, both true sides, use parable teaching. Michael Moore understands November 9 in the history of World War I and World War II. We understood November 9 in the history of World War I and World War II. Coming back to the ship of Alexandria. Now it divides midnight from the midnight cry. Oh, sorry. Now when we're speaking about these lines, in the context, they're speaking about the United States and Adventism. They're lines of institutions. So when we speak about two false prophets in the lines of the institutions, does that relate to this movement exactly? I want to suggest that it actually doesn't. I want to suggest that if we're going to discuss this, we have to think about the institutions and what is happening with this split within the institutions. I think we will do this more broadly at another time. I just want us to actually start thinking about that. And then if we do that at another time, people can bring their questions and their thoughts. But this is describing false prophets at the level of institutions, and there's two of them. Alexandria divides midnight from the midnight cry. You have 9/11, the east wind strikes. The ship is severely damaged. It's undergirded. Then comes midnight. An angel comes down to Paul and he gives him a message. This is 2019. What was this message? It's an increase of knowledge of what waymark? They're warning, the angel is warning Paul that the ship is about to be shipwrecked. It's an increase of knowledge of this waymark, an increase of knowledge of the Sunday law. This is the dispensation of the early rain for the 144,000. That's why we're seeing Paul go through this experience. He represents the 144,000, and he has an increase of knowledge on the shipwreck. So we have it open up at 9:11. A message unsealed. An angel comes down. He's given an increase of knowledge on the shipwreck. 2021, at midnight there was a cry. That cry is that they can now see land in front of them and they can measure the distance. So we have the symbol of time. So where are we on these reform lines? We are here. We are between midnight and the midnight cry. So in 2019, what did we have? An increase of knowledge on the Sunday law waymark. What did we understand was that sin at the Sunday law? We understand it will have something to do with nationalism, sexism, and homophobia. We understand it will have something to do with equality. We take that from the history of slavery in America, particularly in the 1850s and 1860s. So we have that increase of knowledge. The same time we have that increase of knowledge, we also have these two false prophets. These two false prophets are preaching a nationalistic, sexist, homophobic message, and they're using inspiration in the Bible to justify that. So we are standing in the history of the increase of knowledge between when that increase of knowledge is first pronounced and when it reaches a cry. When it reaches a cry, time will be given. Time until the distance between that point and land, that point and shipwreck, that point in the Sunday law. So we know where we are standing in Acts 27. We can have the assurance that right when we were supposed to have that increase of knowledge, that we in fact had it. We began these presentations by drawing up the line of the 144,000, then the priests, Levites, and Nethinims. And when we did that, we were able to identify that the increase of knowledge for the 144,000 has to occur at the same waymark as the close of probation for the first group called. So already in the structure of those lines, they demand you have an increase of knowledge at the Sunday of the Sunday law at the same waymark as is the close of probation for the priests. And that occurred just as you would have expected. I hope that knowledge anchors us. There was no need within the midnight cry message itself for that midnight cry message of equality to change our understanding of the Sunday law. We could have drawn lines that showed Eden to Eden. Eden to Eden when it comes to nationalism, Eden and Eden when it comes to sexism. We could have done that, left it there, given the message of equality, without that changing our definition of the Sunday law sin. We did not need to change what the Sunday law sin was to give the message of equality, but it did change our definition of equality. Not in 2018 when the midnight cry was first given, but in 2019. Our understanding of the Sunday law could not have changed in 2018 because 2018 was not the close of probation for the priests. The message of the Sunday law had to come connected with our close of probation. And the fact that that was given last year should give us an assurance that the waymarks are fulfilling just as the structures dictate that they should. How much longer do I have? Okay. So we're finished with Acts 27. We understand that we have given that increase of knowledge. We are continuing to understand and refine our understanding of what that sin of the United States is. It continues to swell. We are in that swelling. Come Panium, we know that the cry will be made. We will have a more complete, more thorough understanding of what that Sunday law waymark looks like. As much as it seems easy right now to say equality, the waymark is more complex. Equality over what issue? Is it something that relates to nationalism? Is it something that relates to sexism? Is it something that relates to homophobia? Is it something in Congress? Is it something in the judicial branch of the United States? We have a more complete understanding to grasp of the Sunday law. We are in the swelling of that message. The increase of knowledge was given just as it should be. The formalization will be given just the same. So if you don't mind, I might erase that board work. We okay to erase that? Okay. We're a little short on space. If you have any questions, please put them in the question and answer box. No questions. You're a good crowd. So I wanted to start with Acts 27 because that's where we particularly began. That's usually my first thought. And because it gives us that history of the increase of knowledge towards the Sunday law. The Sunday law is the shut door, the lines of institutions. It gives us more of an anchoring of that history, of that swelling of the message of the Sunday law. Because while it is about institutions, that same dispensation that we drew is also the increase of the early rain for the 144,000. So you can look at it from two perspectives. It is that swelling of a message that will show that for the institutions that will show their fall at the Sunday law. It's also the swelling of the early rain for the 144,000. So we looked at it from both perspectives. Where I would want to go to now is where I think lines that we must review before we go on to any other line. We really have to come back and look at the lines of the revolutions. Without understanding where we are on the lines of the revolutions, will determine where we place ourselves in other reform lines. So to come to understanding the lines of the revolutions, to come to understand the lines of the revolutions, we need to go back some and show how they actually developed into those lines. A couple of questions. Someone asked, if you don't mind clarifying for me, were you speaking of the increase of knowledge already having taken place on the line of the 144,000? So If I can just remind us of that line. Make that a little bit. Ellen White will give you these three waymarks. We've constructed 1989 and 9/11. These ones already stand. But we know that we begin to give a message at the Sunday law. We already agreed that that was 34 AD for the end of ancient Israel, the history of the first Advent. So before Jewish people can go to the Gentiles at 34 AD, what has to happen? There's going to be a systematic preparation of the people of God to do that work. So all that we have constructed, where we construct 1989, 9/11, and that experience, is we have constructed for our own time the preparation that must take place to give that loud cry message to the world. We see that that occur under John the Baptist, under Christ, under the disciples back to the church. And we've been able to construct that so that we know what's going to happen, what must take place in Adventism prior to the Sunday law for us to be fitted up and ready to go to the world with the loud cry message. So this is all the preparation. And it fits the model of agriculture. Ploughing, early rain. Ploughing, early rain, latter rain, harvest. Every dispensation has an increase of knowledge. We are here. This is 2019, this is 2021, often named after battles, Raphia and Panium, battles found in Daniel chapter 11. So we stand in the increase of knowledge. When the Sunday law hits, should God's people be prepared? If you can't understand the Sunday law that has just occurred, how will you then be able to go forward and warn the world at that waymark? You won't have it figured out yourself. So before the Sunday law comes, we must understand the external events that are occurring, that are building up to that Sunday law. That occurs through an increase of knowledge and a formalization. So yes, we're already in that time period. 2019 was the increase of knowledge, 2021, the formalization. In Acts 27, because of that line of institutions, you can call it midnight cry, shut door shipwreck at the Sunday law for the institutions. We have drawn this. This isn't the line of the institutions. This is the line of the 144,000. But it has that same dispensation of a swelling message about the Sunday law that begins at 9/11. Increase of knowledge, 2019. So yes, we're already in that swelling. Coming back to the revolutions, I want us to be reminded how we actually came to that. take us back over that history. So, I'm going to draw the line of the 144,000 again. I'm just going to make it higher and a lot bigger. So that's our line of the 144,000. We have particularly these three middle waymarks. I want to focus on those. 9/11, Sunday law, close of probation. When we come to the beginning of modern Israel, the history of the Millerites, what are those three waymarks? Someone can tell me in the question and answer box. What's the waymark of 9/11, Sunday law, close of probation? Start with close of probation. I'm doing the Millerites as we've taught it in the past. So in the past we did not teach 1861. When was the shut door for them? October 22, 1844. So the shut door it was October 22, 1844. What about the waymark of 9/11? Sister Elaine has drawn them out for us. She's April 19, August 15, October 22. Maybe not that so far back into our teaching. Sometime around when I entered the movement, but people don't know when that is. I agree with the first and the last. But I would put July 21 lining up with the Sunday law. So you'll have April 19, July 21, October 22. What's the theme? What theme are we following? So we're following a particular thread, a particular story. If I was to do their lines as I would draw for the 144,000 and two groups, I would agree I would put August 11, 1840, but we're tracing a particular story. That's why I put April 19. And what story is that? What story gives us a shut door in October 22? I want to suggest that this story that places April 19 here and traces July 21st and October is the story of Matthew 25. This is tracing that parable story through their experience. So, April 19, what happens? Yes, 10 virgins. April 19, Matthew 25, what verse? The tarrying time. So you have a tarrying at April 19. We discussed this before when we talked about Acts 27, the way it combines midnight and midnight cry, but we're going to mark it as July 21st here, the beginning of that cry. So you have April 19, a tarrying time. Then you have July 21, what begins here? A cry is made. The bridegroom is coming, go ye out to meet him. And then the bridegroom comes, October 22. So this story that places us in April 19, marking 9/11, then takes us through the tarrying time, the cry, the bridegroom is coming, go ye out to meet him, that now has time attached, that then takes us to October 22, when 5 of those virgins were foolish and they find the door closed, they cannot enter, the division. So this story that we've been drawing on these lines is just the story of Matthew 25. It's in the context of this story that it's going to talk about July 21st. At midnight there was a cry made, behold, the bridegroom cometh, go ye out to meet him. Midway between the spring of 1844, where it was at first supposed that the 2,300 days would terminate, and that point in the autumn of 1844, to which it was afterwards ascertained that they really extended, just such a cry as this was suddenly raised. So midway between when they thought the bridegroom would come, April 19, to when they later understood he really would come, October 22, midway between those two understandings, a cry was suddenly raised. That cry was raised on July 21st. In the parable of the 10 virgins, this is midnight. The Millerites took that symbology and they called it midway. And they understood that not just as a symbol was it midway, it was a literal fulfillment in their time. July 21st was midway between April 19 and October 22. So when we understand Millerite history, is this talking about 9/11 Sunday law close of probation? No, and that's where people were saying that from the very beginning. Some were already starting to express those thoughts. July 21st is not Sunday law. 1850 is Sunday law. July 21st July 21st is midnight, is that middle way mark, is the beginning of the cry for what group? The first group called. So this is a direct application, not for the lines of the 144,000, but for the priests. In that context, April 19 is 9/11. July 21st is what way mark? (2014). October 22 is what way mark? 2019. This experience, this parable of the 10 virgins, is speaking about one group of people, the experience of one group through their time of preparation, then the tarrying, they fall asleep, they're awakened by a cry, they go forth to meet the bridegroom, they face that shut door. One group of virgins called, and they understood that this was directly them. This was the experience of the Millerites. The Millerites were one group called. The first group called, in our own history, we may call them the priests, but they are the church. The preparation of the church before the message must go to the world. The preparation of a people to give that message to the world. October 22 was not the close of probation for that reform line. We know that now, but it still marks a shut door. And we can take that shut door, even that symbol comes from the parable of the 10 virgins. So all of our symbology here has also come from that parable. The tarrying, the cry, midnight, the shut door. All those symbols are from this parable. And this is the tracing of those symbols on a reform line. Their reform line for that history directly correlates to the reform line of the priests. The first group called from the church. Therefore, July 21st in its primary sense is 2014. 2014 takes on the symbol of midnight, the symbol of midway. So just before we close, July 21st is midnight, midway between 9/11 and 2019. July 21st, midway. 2014, midway. Is July 21st midway between April 19 and October 22? Yes, it's literally midway. But what do we do when we make an application? Does it stay literal to literal? Remember the presentations we've done in the last weeks. Who does literal to literal? Conservative evangelicals. We don't do literal to literal. Not in this context. We don't do literal to spiritual. Literal to symbolic. 2014 does not have to be literally midway between 9/11 and 2019. So the Sunday law also takes on that symbol of being midnight. The Sunday law is not going to be midway between 9/11 and the close of probation. If we believed that, we'd be looking at over 20 years between the Sunday law and the close of probation. It's already been 19 years since 9/11. It takes on the symbol of being midway or midnight. So our original history that we're learning from becomes the literal. It is the parable. We make an application and it has a symbolic application. So our first step to understanding 2019, to understanding the revolutions, the revolution in America, in the United States, is to understand 2014 as midnight, as midway, as a midway point between two other points in time, is understanding the literal now is the symbolic. Question asks, what day would mark the second advent on that fractal? So if we have time later on in this camp, I want us to have a much closer look at the history of the Millerites. Not necessarily to make application, but to understand its structure, if we can just place its structure. But we will do that at another point in time. If you don't mind holding on your question, and we will come back to that. So we're due to close now. So just to summarize, we began by placing ourselves in the history of the end of ancient Israel. This history is our key. It is the history of success. End of ancient success explains end of modern success. We traced the whole overarching reform lines, 144,000 priests, Levites, Nethinims, and then we did John the Revelator is 144,000, and then the disciples, back to the Jewish nation at Pentecost, Gentiles 34 AD. That structure holds sound for the end of ancient and for the end of modern. In both histories, there is a group successfully prepared to bring that work to completion. Then we looked at John in the time of trouble. We recognized after 70 AD that he went through that experience. Every earthly support cut off, could not buy or sell, a death decree, but he lived to witness the second advent. We recognized that the time of trouble for the first group called was a history between the cross and Pentecost. Of particular pain is that period shortly after the cross, before they go into the upper room. There is the particular suffering. Then we understood that we can also link that with the experience of Christ in the wilderness after 30 years of preparation for the priesthood. So we overlaid them. Jacob's time of trouble, the history after the cross, which is Jacob's time of trouble for the first group, then the history of the wilderness after the 30 years preparation, and the baptism. We placed where we are in that time period. Then we went to Ellen White's dream. We started to discuss why we would say every earthly support is cut off in this time period. We see how we have had earthly support along this whole journey. Whatever that earthly support has looked like. We have had our pet doctrines, our baggage from Adventism, which is really baggage from apostate evangelical Christianity. We've managed to take that baggage so far at the beginning to get us over that first hurdle. God had to work in a special way. He took the reins of the horses and he guided them himself. But then he gives us the cords, the parable methodology that travel with us through our entire period. We hold on to those cords. We start just holding on with our hands. We have confidence in the placement of our feet. We have confidence in our shoes and the way that they grip. And then we lose that confidence. We have to take off our shoes. Then we have to take off our stockings. Then we go barefoot. And then we see that the feet start to bleed, and this path hurts. These cords continue to grow till you can no longer hold them with your hands. Then you must hold them with your entire body. You reach a chasm. This chasm is described in the language of Jesus at Gethsemane. It's also described in the same language as Ellen White uses for Christ's experience in the wilderness, when he had no bread, when there's no message. And right in the midst of that agony, people are required to get across this chasm to heaven, to the second advent, with no foundation beneath their feet, no earthly support. The only security they have is in the lines in the parable methodology. That is sufficient if they are trusted. It is no time to say, you're repeating what we've already heard before, therefore I will close my ears. I hope we can see that is dangerous. We must understand and have faith in those lines. At that point, everyone starts to question what holds the lines. They must get to the point of recognizing, first of all, the experience in their past history cannot be forgotten. They must recognize God holds the lines. Once they trust them, those lines will bring them to the other side and out of this time of trouble. We understand that people leave all along this pathway. It's only those lines that will bring us to the other side. So we start to review those lines. We started to discuss what else holds us to this movement, what has held us, that earthly support that we're now losing. This isn't earthly stuff. These are ideas, doctrines, worldviews, misunderstandings about the kingdom of God. Those are the things that have held us on this pathway, other than the lines that will no longer support us in this time period. We either choose to trust the lines and travel with them, or we go over that cliff face, holding on to our wrong understanding of the nature of the kingdom. As I've expressed before, there is more than one error regarding the nature of the kingdom. There is more than one ditch. There are two ditches, two sides of the road to fall into. Then we went back to review our different road, different parable. Then we went back to review our lines. We went back to Acts 27. We showed how both the line of the institutions and the line of the 144,000 show us this swelling of a message that warns the institutions that they're about to be shipwrecked. But it also prepares the 144,000 for the Sunday law. It helps us understand what this waymark looks like, how to prepare for it. And that increase of knowledge came right on time in 2019, understanding that the message of equality had implications for the Sunday law itself, for the sin of the United States itself. Once we established that in Acts 27, we then moved on to understanding, to starting to review the lines of the revolutions. And we wanted to go back. We needed to, before we could understand the revolutions, we had to first understand how we got to them, how we made 2014 midnight and midway. When we remind ourselves how we made 2014 midnight and midway, then we can start to understand the literal histories of revolutions that built up that study. And we will continue with that tomorrow. Please, as people have questions, please continue to write them in. Even if they don't relate directly to this study, we will be looking at other studies. We will be looking more closely at the line of the beginning of modern Israel, the history of the Millerites, because we need to apply ourselves after October 22. We need to understand the two lines for that history, where after October 22, we are also, as was presented 2 weeks ago, after 1861. Two lines from the end of ancient Israel. We are after the baptism. We are after the cross. We particularly want to leave this camp meeting with those 4 lines locked into place. But first of all, the revolutions. If you kneel with me, we're going to close with a word of prayer. Dear Father in heaven, thank you for our blessings. Lord, we know that many are suffering in this time period. People are suffering in different ways, with different battles. We know that we have still held on to our old sins, just as did Jacob, that we must remove these, Lord, to have victory, that we must trust your guiding. You have guided us successfully all these 30 years. You have prepared and trained, and still we are not fit for duty. I pray, Lord, that you will help us. Help us see what must fit us up for this work. May we submit to your guiding hand, whatever it looks like, even if it hurts, even if our feet bleed, Lord, even as we sweat and we look at that chasm with fear. I pray, Lord, we will trust your guiding. I pray, Lord, for all those in the movement all across the world who are meeting today. There are others who cannot meet. Lord, the hour is late in portions of Europe. The hour is late in Africa. We know that not everyone is able to participate across the world with time zones, with trouble accessing internet. But Lord, we pray that they may be able to be anchored to these reform lines, to where we are in history, that as brothers and sisters, those who do understand, will help stabilize those that are struggling, that we will not put tests before our brothers and sisters that God has not yet given us a message on, that we would work to build up your cause, not to take down. May we each see our responsibility, our personal responsibility in this movement. I pray this in Jesus' name. Amen.